Books are really satisfying. Not only to read, but just, I don't know, to hold it in your hand. It's before you read a book, you sort of have these, I don't know, expectations, maybe excitement, maybe a little bit of skepticism, because in your hands you hold some sort of a story, written by someone somewhere in the world. And also while you read it, maybe you're halfway through, and then you hold the book in your hand, and now you can sort of contemplate the things that you've already read in it, and try and think about what you've read and maybe what could come after that. And then once you've finished it, it's sort of this completed sort of feeling of accomplishment, and you become a little bit wiser, maybe depending on what book you're reading, maybe a little bit more appreciative or a little bit more skeptical, depending on the subject and whether you're reading non-fiction or fiction, or something that is a little like an account or more journalistic in nature. The book I have here is a book by George Orwell that had quite a big impact on me. Not in a negative, or not in like a heavy-hearted way. I'll get into it a little bit. I want to share it with you. The book is called Down and Out in Paris and London. A lot of people, I'd imagine, had already read this book. And if you have, I don't know, tell me in the comment section below what you thought about it. So, George Orwell is quite famous for two books in particular: Animal Farm and 1984, obviously, and those are his fictions and his sort of later work, and they're the most famous. I have pretty much almost his discography, maybe not. I've got quite a few of his books that I've all read, and I have to say, even though I think 1984 is great, and I'll do a podcast on that in the future, but his previous books, Down and Out in Paris and London, Homage, I'd like to say homage to Catalonia, and Road to Wigan Pier are amazing books. They sort of non-fiction, but they read and flow like beautiful fiction. But it's Orwell's sort of account of things that he experienced. And this first one, I have to say, when I picked up the book, I knew I had to read it, but when I picked it up and I looked at the art and the cover and the sort of the title and everything, I thought this book would be depressing, and it would sort of go into, I don't know, just scenes of desperation and suffering, and it would just be something really that would get you like down, because it's about being down and out, being destitute, absolutely being destitute to the point of spending nights under bridges and going to churches for charity and cups of tea and things. And it's I was apprehensive when I started reading it, because I'm quite a sensitive person, or I can be quite a sensitive person, and if you see people that are down and out, on the streets, it's depressing. It's never a fun thing, and you try and help out, but you always know that poor people, like, what are they gonna do? Maybe you give them a 20 rand or a couple of or some bread or something like that. But poor, So what I'm trying to say is that when I started reading this book, I expected to be depressed, and it was almost the opposite. It was interesting, and he gave a very honest account of his experiences. But I was smiling. I think I had a grin on my face for most of the book, and there were times in this book where I literally laughed out loud. I hope that's not bad. I hope that's not a bad thing. I hope I'm not a terrible person, and that excuse me, and that Orwell wrote this book with the intention of being extremely serious. But I really enjoyed it. There were really funny bits in here. They are, quirky characters and quirky situations, and he makes friends, very interesting people, and the things they say, and like if you're a bum or like a hobo or something in the streets, I guess in Paris and London in the 1920s. I don't know, it's interesting. Flipping through, I love the smell. I love the smell of books and paper. I think especially like really old ones. This one isn't old. This one I picked up at the bookstore. I would have bought it at a secondhand bookstore if I could, because I always prefer that. Not only because it's cheaper, but I mean there's something a little bit more romantic about it. I think especially with classics as well. I'm not saying don't support your local bookstore, but a lot of novels, not that I read a lot of new sort of novels, but a lot of it, if it's not good enough or epic enough to end up in the classics section, then it's like buying a thick magazine. You read it and it's like, it's fine. It was interesting. It was a cool story there. There's a little bit of a love relationship, and something went wrong and they broke up, and there's all these little stories. But the profound books usually end up in the classic section, and more so in the classic section of a second-hand bookstore, where I would really encourage you to go and look. Alright, so I was saying that I was expecting this to be depressing, and if you look at the cover here, and I recognize this artist. He's the same. His name is Shepard Fairey, a very famous street artist, and he's the founder of the brand Obey. I'm sure everyone has seen some Shepard Fairey sort of street art and so on. It's very sort of digital, maybe mixed medium a little bit, very striking, hard lines, made for print, made for stencils, you can spray on the wall. Although Shepard Fairey didn't really spray paint, he made posters that you could stick up on a wall. He was in a very good documentary called Exit Through the Gift Shop that I would recommend anyone watch. I think it's one of the best documentaries that I have ever seen personally. He's the same guy that did those hope posters for Obama during the Obama campaign, so quite a famous guy. And it looks like he specifically designed this cover for the book, because at the back, if you look there, you can see that he did Animal Farm as well. You guys hear the ducks in the background. I think they're having an argument. And he did 1984 as well, so he was obviously commissioned to do this. And it's this image of, it's a working class, lower, a down and out person with his face in his hands, and he's got sort of a working class sort of English cap on. I don't know if it's English, maybe it's European. But although I think the art is striking, I don't think it really gives you the spirit of the book. I would maybe have a guy sort of in the same style, but you can see his face. Maybe has a little bit of a smile on his face, or maybe not even a smile, but show his eyes, and maybe he's got a rucksack with some things in it, or but this makes it look way more depressing than the book actually is. So that's my criticism of the cover art. I'm sorry, Shepherd Ferry, I'm a fan, but So if we can let's look at the back here. So at the top is a quote. It is altogether. So this is a quote from the book itself. It's altogether curious, your first contact with poverty, unquote. And then a description of the book. To be pure, to be poor and destitute in 1920s Paris and London was to experience life at its lowest ebb. George Orwell, penniless and with nowhere to go, found himself experiencing just this as he wandered the streets of both capitals in search of a job. By day, he tramped the streets, often passing time with screevers or street artists, drunks and other hobos. At night, he stood in line for a bed in a spike or doss house where a cup of sugary tea, a hunk of stale bread and a blanket were the only sustenance and comfort to offer. And then we have another little passage here, typed in red, bold red. Down and Out in Paris and London is George Orwell's haunting account of the streets and those who have no choice but to live in them. I understand all this haunting account and everything, but it's haunting. It's not that haunting. It is to me at least. It wasn't that haunting. It was very interesting, very compelling, and I was hooked on this book from the beginning. And like I said, it's not depressing. Haunting, yes. Thought-provoking, absolutely. Alright. And then John Mortimer has a quote at the bottom. A man who looked at his world with wonder and wrote down exactly what he saw in admirable prose. And that's true. That's true. And I mentioned earlier, even though this isn't a fictional novel, it is sort of like a journalistic account. A journalistic account, I think, is a good way to describe it. But it reads beautifully like a novel, like the characters. So yeah, no, there are fascinating characters in here. And the experience that Orwell goes through, is it fascinating? I don't want to give away too much about what happens in the book, but there are interesting characters. He's got a Russian friend in here, and he makes friends with some tramps, and he documents his experience of like what he eats, and the characters, obviously, like I said, that he meets. Very fascinating. I made a fold here for a reason. Another really nice thing about this book is that it is quite short. It's 215 pages in sort of, I'd say, medium print. So a person can, you can read this in one day, on a lazy Sunday, or I didn't read it in one day. I don't read that fast or quickly. It took me, I think, I read it in 2 days. It's very relaxed. But so it's not as daunting a task as sort of Ayn Rand's books or Dostoevsky, or I'm busy reading Leo Tolstoy's War and Peace at the moment. Oh well, I've been reading it for about a year. And I'm halfway, or just over halfway. The book it's the longest book I will ever think I finish. It's 1,400 or so pages, so that's crazy, but I will finish it, and I want to. unlike my previous review, on this one I tried to do a little bit of prep. I went to this little cafe for lunch. Interesting place. It's called the Burlesque Cafe, and they're supposed to really specialize in French cuisine. But recently they started serving German comfort food, which I found very interesting. Look, I love German food. I really do. I love German beer as well. So I'm sorry, vegans and vegetarians. I do like Eisbein or some pork belly, and I do like sauerkraut and German mustard and all of that. This place was interesting because I thought it was sort of like France under the occupation of the Nazis. French decor with German food. And I don't know if anyone else notices that. I mentioned the chef is a German man, and I mentioned it, and he got a little like a frown on his face. I don't know if he misunderstood me. I maybe he took it as an insult, but I didn't mean it as an insult. Anyways, and I sort of flipped through the book and stopped at a certain page, because I wanted to read a little section for you guys, just so you can get sort of a feeling of Orwell and his writing and the way why it's so sort of enchanting in a way. And you can and I started making little folds at the corners as placeholders, and I sat there for maybe 20 minutes, and I noticed that almost anywhere I open, I would just fold the little page, because everywhere is just little gems of pieces of brilliance. And Orwell, after all, did win the Nobel Prize in English literature, so it just goes to show. And so I do want to read you. I'm just going to read a paragraph so you get an idea. And this little section I think is quite good, because I mentioned that there are lots of interesting characters, and that he writes it like a novel, investigative, perhaps. I don't know, you decide for yourself. So here is a short description of a friend of his that he met. And I quote: "Paddy was my mate for about the next fortnight, and as he was the first tramp I had known at all, well, I want to give an account of him. I believe that he was a typical tramp, and there are tens of thousands in England like him. He was a tallish man, aged about 35, with fair hair going grizzled and watery blue eyes. His features were good, but his cheeks had langed and had that greyish, dirty, in-the-grain look that comes of a bread and margarine diet. He was dressed rather better than most tramps, in a tweed shooting jacket and a pair of very old evening trousers with the braid still on them. Evidently the braid figured in his mind evidently the braid figured in his mind as a lingering scrap of respectability, and he took care to sew it on again when it came loose. He was careful of his appearance altogether, and carried a razor and a toothbrush that he would not sell, though he had sold his papers, and I'm guessing that's like Rizla for cigarettes, and even his pocket knife long since. Nevertheless, one would have known him for a tramp 100 yards away. There was something in his drifting style of walk, and the way he had of hunching his shoulders forward, essentially abject. Seeing him walk, you felt instinctively that he would sooner take a bow than give one. Yeah, that is by no means one of the very great passages or things there. There are excruciatingly funny moments in here, and there are tense moments, and there are, overall it's a humbling book. it's a humbling book I will read again, and it's a book I would really give like anyone to read. All right, friends. I think that's enough babbling about a book here for the moment. I don't know if the next one I'll do will be another George Orwell book, but I think I'll go for it. Lots of interesting scenes in here. Do yourself a favor, guys, and read George Orwell. You'll never regret it, guys. Oh, by the way, that cat is Tom. Yeah, he seemed to have found the only sort of little beam of light in this side of the house to go and chill and to do a little bit of sunbathing. It is getting a little bit chilly here, so yeah, just the life of a cat is amazing. You know, if you're well fed and you've got space to roam and you can just sleep and eat and purr and play. So lucky, so nice. And those little spots under his chin there, that's before I get to that, like, the poor thing, he's got cat AIDS, but he's doing all right, you know. He's had some worse days, but these days, you know, he's a happy cat. Took him to the vet not too long ago just for a checkup, and he's got these little spots red under his chin, and apparently that's acne. I never thought cats could get acne. I wonder if he's going through his teenage years. No, I don't know. Anyway, thank you very much for listening, guys. And yeah, take care of yourselves. Goodbye. Goodbye.